I've been a trucker for nearly 20 years. The hum of the engine and the stretch of the open road have been my constant companions. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what I encountered that night on the endless highway. It was a routine delivery, or so I thought. A load of furniture from Chicago to Denver. I left in the late afternoon, planning to drive through the night and make good time. The first few hours were uneventful, the rhythmic thrum of my tires against the asphalt soothing me into a state of focused calm. But around midnight, things started to get strange. It began with a fog. A thick, rolling mist that seemed to come out of nowhere, swallowing the road ahead and making it almost impossible to see. I slowed down, squinting through the windshield. The fog wasn't just dense. It was unnatural, almost alive. It clung to the truck, wrapping around it like ghostly fingers. I checked my GPS, but the screen was blank. No signal, not unusual in remote areas, but this stretch of road shouldn't have been remote. I'd driven it countless times before. I tried the CB radio, but all I got was static. That's when the unease started to creep in. After what felt like an eternity, the fog began to lift, but the relief was short-lived. As the mist cleared, I realized I had no idea where I was. The highway stretched out ahead and behind me, but there were no signs, no exits, no landmarks. Just an endless ribbon of road cutting through an endless sea of darkness. I drove for hours, or at least it felt like hours. My watch had stopped, and my phone was dead. I had no way of knowing how long I'd been on that road. I started to panic, my mind racing with all the horror stories I'd heard over the years. But this was different. This was real. I decided to turn around. Maybe I'd missed a turn or an exit in the fog, but as I turned the truck and started back the way I came, I realized something was horribly wrong. The road behind me was the same as the road ahead. No exits, no signs, just an endless stretch of blacktop. I tried to stay calm, convincing myself it was some kind of bizarre prank or an elaborate hallucination. But the further I drove, the more I felt like I was being watched. The darkness pressed in on all sides, and every so often, I thought I saw shapes moving just beyond the reach of my headlights. Shadows that flickered and danced, taunting me. I don't know when I first noticed the whispers, faint at first, just at the edge of hearing, but growing louder and more insistent. They came from everywhere and nowhere, voices murmuring in languages I couldn't understand. They filled the cab of the truck, wrapping around me like the fog had, filling my mind with a growing sense of dread. And then I saw them. Figures on the side of the road. Human, but not quite. Their eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and their faces were twisted into grotesque masks of pain and terror. They reached out to me as I passed, their fingers grasping at the air, their mouths moving in silent screams. I floored the accelerator, desperate to get away, but the figures kept appearing. More and more of them, lining the road, their numbers growing with every mile. I was trapped in some kind of nightmare loop, the highway stretching on forever, a parade of lost souls accompanying me on my journey to nowhere. Sleep deprivation must have been setting in. I started to see things inside the truck. Faces in the mirrors, hands reaching out from the dashboard. I heard laughter, cruel and mocking, and the whispers turned into screams. My own screams. Desperation clawed at me. I knew I had to get out, but there was nowhere to go. The fuel gauge was dropping, and I knew I couldn't keep driving forever. Eventually the truck would stop, and I would be alone in the dark with whatever those things were. In a moment of clarity, I decided to leave the truck. Maybe on foot, I could find an exit or some kind of help. I pulled over to the side of the road, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped out into the night. The air was thick with an otherworldly chill, and the whispers grew louder, more urgent. I started walking, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The figures on the side of the road turned to watch me, their eyes following my every move. I tried to ignore them, focusing on putting one foot in front of the other. But the road stretched on and on and on. Time lost all meaning. I walked until my legs gave out, then crawled, desperate to escape. But the highway was endless, and the figures were closing in. I could feel their cold breath on my neck, their fingers brushing against my skin. I was trapped in their world, a prisoner of the endless highway. And then I saw it. A flicker of light in the distance. Hope surged through me, and I forced myself to my feet, stumbling towards it. As I got closer, I realized it was a sign, an exit sign. Salvation. I broke into a run, my heart pounding with fear and anticipation. But as I reached the sign, my hope turned to despair. The sign was old and weathered, the letters barely legible. It pointed to an exit that no longer existed, the road crumbling into darkness. I fell to my knees, tears streaming down my face. The figures closed in, their whispers turning into a deafening roar. I was lost, trapped on the endless highway with no way out. The darkness swallowed me, and I knew I would never escape. As the cold fingers wrapped around me, and the world faded to black, I realized the horrifying truth. The highway had no end because it wasn't a place. It was a state of being, a purgatory for lost souls, forever driving, forever searching, never finding. I was one of them now, a ghost on the endless highway, doomed to wander the dark roads for eternity. And as the last vestiges of my sanity slipped away, I knew I would never escape the horrors of the endless highway. Every night, the whispers return, and I relive the nightmare, driving endlessly, forever seeking a way out that doesn't exist. If you ever find yourself on a road with no exits, with whispers in the darkness and figures on the side of the road, remember my story. Turn back while you can, because once you're on the endless highway, there's no way out. As a long-haul trucker, I've seen my fair share of eerie, late-night rest stops and shadowy truck stops, but nothing ever prepared me for the horror I encountered at Rest Area 13. I had been driving for hours, my eyes dry and heavy, from staring at the endless stretch of interstate. The sun had set hours ago, and the night swallowed the road in inky darkness. My route was taking me through a remote part of the country where cell service was spotty at best, and the nearest town was miles away. Fatigue was setting in, so when I saw a sign for Rest Area 13, I breathed a sigh of relief. I didn't recall seeing it on my route plan or GPS, but then again, these devices weren't always perfect. My truck rumbled off the interstate and into the rest area, which was shrouded in a thick fog that seemed to cling to everything. The rest area was eerily quiet. There were a few old cars parked in the lot, their paint chipped and faded, as if they hadn't moved in years. The lights in the parking lot flickered weakly, casting long, shifting shadows. I pulled my rig into a spot and killed the engine, the sudden silence almost deafening. I climbed out of the cab, stretching my legs and looking around. There was a small building that appeared to house the restrooms and a vending machine, its neon glow the only real light in the oppressive darkness. I made my way over, the gravel crunching under my boots, and pushed open the door. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed and flickered, casting a sickly yellow light over the dingy tiles and cracked mirrors. It smelled musty, like old water and neglect. I did my business quickly, eager to get back to the relative safety of my truck. As I was washing my hands, I glanced up and froze. In the mirror, I saw movement behind me. A shadowy figure stood near the door, watching me. I spun around, but there was no one there. My heart pounded in my chest as I scanned the room, finding nothing but empty stalls and silence. "Get a grip," I muttered to myself. "You're just tired." I dried my hands and left the building, my eyes darting around nervously. The fog seemed thicker now, almost suffocating. I could barely see the outline of my truck through the haze. As I walked back, I noticed something strange. The old cars I had seen earlier were gone. The parking lot was completely empty, save for my rig. A chill ran down my spine, and I quickened my pace. I climbed into the cab and locked the doors, the sense of unease growing stronger. I decided to check my GPS again, hoping for some sense of normalcy. But when I turned it on, the screen flickered and displayed nothing but static. Panic set in. I grabbed my phone, but it too was dead, despite being fully charged just an hour ago. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead as I realized I was truly alone. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the truck, shaking it violently. I jumped, my heart racing, and looked around frantically. There, outside my window, was a pale face pressed against the glass, its eyes hollow and lifeless. It mouthed something I couldn't hear, its expression one of utter despair. I screamed and fumbled for the ignition, my hands trembling uncontrollably. The truck roared to life, and I slammed it into gear, tearing out of the rest area as fast as I could. The fog seemed to close in around me, and I could feel eyes watching me from the darkness. As I sped down the interstate, the fog began to lift, and I finally felt like I could breathe again. I didn't stop until I reached the next town, where I pulled into a well-lit truck stop and parked among the other trucks. I sat there for a long time, trying to calm my nerves. Eventually, I gathered the courage to ask a fellow trucker if he had ever heard of Rest Area 13. He looked at me like I was crazy. "Rest Area 13? There's no such place around here. Must have been a nightmare or something," he said, shaking his head. But I knew what I had seen. The faces of the dead haunted my dreams for nights to come, their silent pleas for help echoing in my mind. I avoided that stretch of interstate from then on, and every time I passed a rest area, a shiver ran down my spine. Years later, I heard rumors about a rest area that had been shut down decades ago after a horrific accident claimed the lives of several travelers. They said the spirits of those who died there never left, trapped between worlds, seeking help from anyone who dared to stop. I never found out if it was true, but one thing was certain. Rest Area 13 was no ordinary place, and those who find it might never escape its grasp. Even now, as I drive through the night, I sometimes catch a glimpse of that fog in my rearview mirror, and I know they are still out there, waiting for the next unsuspecting traveler to wander into their eternal rest stop. In the heart of a forgotten village stood the house of closed doors, a dilapidated mansion, whispered about in hushed tones by the locals. Its legend was as old as the village itself, telling of doors that led to realms beyond human comprehension, of those who entered and never returned. Despite its ominous reputation, curiosity led many to its threshold, including Ethan, a writer obsessed with the arcane. Ethan had come across the mansion's story in an ancient tome, his fascination driving him to seek it out. The villagers warned him, their eyes clouded with fear, but Ethan's thirst for a tale yet untold propelled him forward. The house stood, silent and imposing, its architecture a bizarre mix of styles, as if it were pieced together from different worlds. Ethan pushed the heavy front door open, stepping into a dimly lit foyer. The air was thick with the scent of dust and decay. Before him were numerous doors, each unique in design, ranging from ornate Victorian to simplistic modern, some appearing ancient, as if carved from the very roots of the earth. He chose a door at random, a heavy wooden barrier with carvings that seemed to shift and change as he watched. Heart racing, he opened it, stepping through into utter darkness. When his eyes adjusted, he found himself in a forest, bathed in perpetual twilight, the trees towering and twisted, their branches clawing at the sky. Ethan explored this world, finding no end to the forest, no sign of life. As he ventured deeper, the trees began to whisper, voices that were not quite human, speaking in a language he felt in his bones rather than heard with his ears. Fear gripped him, urging him to flee back to the door. But when he turned, it had vanished. Panic set in as he ran, the whispers growing louder, more insistent. He stumbled upon a clearing where the trees circled a mirror-like pond. In its reflection, he saw not his own face, but a multitude of eyes staring back, filled with malice and hunger. Realizing the forest itself was alive, and he its prey, Ethan searched desperately for an escape, the whispers now screams in his mind. In a final act of defiance, or perhaps madness, he plunged into the pond, the cold embrace of its waters enveloping him. When he emerged, gasping for air, he was back in the foyer of the house of closed doors. Shaken, he fled the mansion, the doors slamming shut behind him, as if the house itself was satisfied with the terror it had instilled. Back in the village, Ethan wrote of his experience, his story a cautionary tale of curiosity and the unknown. But his tale was met with disbelief, dismissed as the ramblings of a man touched by madness. The house of closed doors stood silent, waiting for the next soul brave or foolish enough to uncover its secrets. But Ethan knew the truth. The doors weren't merely passageways to other worlds. They were tests, reflections of one's inner fears and desires. He had escaped, but something within him had changed. A part of him, forever lost to the whispers of the forest. And so, the house remained, a puzzle box of horrors untold, its legend growing with each soul that dared to uncover its mysteries. The doors were always waiting, always hungry for the next story to unfold within their embrace.